The Cuban crisis was resolved in the end. Soviet missiles were removed from Cuba, and the United States promised not to topple the Castro regime. However, the world had stared Armageddon in the face for nearly 2 weeks. The new phase of the arms race had a very negative effect on the Soviet Union's national budget. In 1962, meat and dairy prices went up by an average 25%. The economic situation led to a riot in the town of Novocherkassk in Russia's south. Workers at a wagon factory took to the streets in protest. The riot was brutally suppressed. More than 20 people died.
Mass arrests followed. Some of the rebels were later given the death penalty. Nikita Khrushchev was fully aware of that. Speaking at the Communist Party meeting, he went out of his way to condone the act. He didn't condemn it, but he did not say a word of sympathy for the victims.
Hunting was one of Khrushchev's few hobbies. Documentaries sought to highlight his hunting expeditions as much as his state visits abroad. The films were edited in such a way to show that each shot hit its target. However, in 1964, Khrushchev himself had become a target. His closest associates were hatching a plot behind his back.
I warned my father about the plot to topple him from power a month before it actually happened. A man from the KGB had told me about it. But soon afterwards, my father went to a sea resort without examining this urgent information. He left the situation to take care of itself. It was his way of saying to his rivals, "Do as you please."
The conspirators stripped Khrushchev of his powers and pensioned him off. Leonid Brezhnev became the new General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party. Everyone except for close relatives cold-shouldered Khrushchev in the first days after his resignation.
It is true that he surrendered without putting up a fight. He must have realized he had no chance of winning the battle for power. All the same, it was a great tragedy for him, because his closest associates had betrayed him.
He was sent into what could be described as political exile. He was given a country house near Moscow. The majority of what few visitors he had were intellectuals who were sincerely unhappy to see the end of the Khrushchev thaw. Painter Boris Zhutovsky was Khrushchev's guest on his 77th and last birthday.
When we went out for a walk, I said, "Mr. Khrushchev, could I make several drawings and take some pictures of you?" He said, "Sure, go ahead."
Boris Zhutovsky has several photos as a reminder of that last meeting with Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev died in October 1971. He never had a chance to see the portrait painted by Zhutovsky after their meeting. As they said goodbye to each other, Khrushchev apologized to the painter for his attack on avant-garde artists at the Manesh Gallery so many years earlier.
He said, "Don't hold a grudge against me." As I looked at the paintings down there, one of the leading artists said, "What they need is a Stalin." I was very angry at him, but I started shouting at you, and those official guys took advantage of that. That's how this portrait came about.
Such five-story buildings are being pulled down in Moscow. They were built when Khrushchev was in power. There was always a catastrophic shortage of housing in the Soviet Union. Khrushchev tried to resolve the problem by building large numbers of prefab apartment blocks, commonly known as Khrushchevkas. They don't look appealing now, but at the time they were a breakthrough in housing development.
Back then it was a real holiday, when people were moved from the filth of poverty to new houses. Speaking about his deeds at the end of his life, Khrushchev never talked about removing Stalin's cult of personality in the Soviet Union. He didn't even speak about the rehabilitation of political prisoners. Instead, with all his pride, he talked about how he provided thousands of people with new homes. He always thought about the common people.
Khrushchev remains a controversial figure long after his death. His son Sergei has lived and worked in the United States for many years, in the country that his father yearned to overtake and outdo. Khrushchev's remains lie in Moscow's Novodevichy convent. He was a confirmed atheist. He promised the Soviet Union would be rid of its last priest by 1980. Sometimes the visitors who come here end up arguing about Khrushchev's legacy by his grave. The debates go on against the backdrop of an unusual black and white monument. Whether the man's light side outweighed his dark is still an open question.